Hello and welcome once again to the It Depends podcast. I, as always, am your host, Kevin Goldsmith, and I am delighted every other week to help you learn how to be a better manager and how to advance to be an engineering senior leader. Each episode, I talk about a different topic. This episode, we're going to talk about speaking to executives or speaking to senior leaders. I have been now a senior leader for several years, so I know both sides of it. Now, I should preface this, speaking as a senior leader, that we don't see ourselves as different. We are people. We are normal people. And we want you generally to think of us as normal people. We don't like being thought of as executives. Maybe some people do. I don't. I remember the first time this happened, a new team had been moved into my organization, and I knew him a little bit, but I hadn't worked as closely with them before. They worked in a different office. I came to their office to visit and check in with folks generally, and they booked some time with me to introduce the team. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And I came into the conference room and I expect just to see the team sitting around and we just have a chat. And instead what happened is they'd created a whole deck to present to me about the team and about what they did. And that was the first time anyone had ever created a deck to present just to me. And it felt very weird to me because I'm like, whoa, I'm just Kevin. You don't have to do that. I felt a little guilty because it was very clear that they'd spent a lot of time preparing for this meeting. I just breezed into the room just thinking we were just going to chill. So I can understand how fraught it can be. When I went to Adobe, I was in Seattle. My director was in San Jose. And I would see him present to the organization once in a while. But the first time he called me, he had a question about something and he just called my office. And I picked up and it was him. I was so scared because I'd never spoken to him directly before. And that was the first time I really felt like, oh my gosh, I'm speaking to the director. I felt it myself. I know how it can feel. I'm now very used to speaking to CEOs and folks who are managing pretty massive companies, but that took a while to figure it out. And it took me making a lot of mistakes. So I'm going to hopefully help you avoid some of those mistakes. And I'll tell you also one of those mistakes. So one of the very first times I presented to an executive was when I was a developer at Microsoft. Right after I joined a brand new team at Microsoft. My team, which was very small, we went to the VP's office to present on what we're doing. And I was asked to present, not just my boss and his boss, which was an honor. And I took it as such. And we did a lot of preparation for the presentation, but it was really just the three of us and the VP. And I was the one who was the first to present. My boss's boss gave a little preamble, and then the first set of slides were mine. This was in the mid-90s. The word avatar was already an industry term, but it wasn't a well-known industry term. We were building virtual world stuff. I used the word avatar. My VP stopped the presentation and said, that word, what word do you use? I said, avatar. He said, how are you using it? And I'm like, it's your representation in a virtual space. And he said, well, that's not what that means. I'm like, well, that is the word that is used. That's the industry term. He's like, no, but that's not what the word avatar means. And he got very, very fixated on what the correct definition of the word was, the dictionary definition. And I said, oh, okay, I understand, but this is the term, the industry term, and it's already an accepted term. But he just couldn't stop talking about it. And we couldn't move the presentation on because he was so fixated that we were using the wrong word. At a certain point, I lost my patience because this was like my first slide. And I had 6 slides, and then my boss had slides, and then his boss had slides. So at a certain point, I said, this is the industry term. Can we move on? He said, okay, sure. We moved on. He was not super enthusiastic through the rest of the presentation. Afterwards, my boss's boss came to me and said, hey, you're not presenting to him anymore. And you don't do that to people. He wants to talk about that. That's what you talk about. He says it's the wrong term. We figure out what term we should use instead. And that was the last time I got to present to them. That was a very early lesson. I was maybe 2 years out of school when that happened. What I learned the hard way talking to that Microsoft VP is that when you speak to executives, every word really carries weight. The real tension here is you are closer to the work than they are. You're the expert in your domain, but you are not necessarily the expert in the room. You're being brought in or you're presenting to an executive because the thing you're working on is important, but you don't know necessarily why it's important, why they're interested. And you shouldn't assume why they're interested. They're going to tell you why they're interested if you listen to them. Executives have the broader business context. You have that deeper technical context. They're optimizing for risk, for clarity, decision-making, not technical elegance. If you're being asked or you're being contacted by an executive, they're either trying to make a decision or they're trying to understand something. They have very specific things they're trying to get from that conversation. And that conversation for them is part of a broader set of conversations. Sure, want to get an update on the project, but they're thinking about 2 other projects and maybe how your project is interacting with them. And maybe they've heard something about your project from one of the other projects or whatever. They're looking for something probably more specific. So if you present to them and you give them a whole bunch of stuff that they're not looking at, you're going to find that they start to interrupt you. They just start asking you questions. They'll interrupt your presentation because they're trying to understand something. It's a great opportunity for visibility. It's certainly something you should take advantage of. However, this friction between you wanting to show off to the executive and them having a very specific need for information, the stakes are your credibility, trust from the executive, your influence, and future access. I was never allowed to present to that VP again. Let's talk about a framework for communicating to executives. And this is by voice, by presentation, by email, possibly by Slack or chat. We're going to go from clarity to context to consequence to control. 4 C's. Clarity. Are you using language that cannot be misinterpreted? Are you being very clear in your communication? Context. Have you situated your topic inside the broader business picture as you understand it? You are not going to have all the same context the executive you're talking to does, but you need to think past the narrow context of your team or the specifics of the project you're working on to articulate how that broader business context is influencing what you're talking about and to make the executive aware that you're aware of that context. Consequence. Have you made it clear what happens if we act or don't? So if you're asking for a decision, if you are articulating a decision you are making and you're trying to get feedback, or if you're just talking about what's going on, what are the consequences of the decision? Because whoever you're talking to, they don't understand necessarily the specifics of what your team's doing. So they need to understand what are the consequences because they may not be obvious to them. They'll be thinking about consequences at a broader context than you are. If your team doesn't deliver this, the sales team was going to sell it next quarter. Here's a great example. You need help delivering this feature on the schedule. Something came up, or there was a dependency on another team and that team was late. So now you're going to be late. So you need some additional help. You need to borrow a developer or 2. So you reach out to an executive. The project timeline is impacted. Here's why. If we don't get that help, I give us a 30% chance of delivering on time. If we do get that help, I think that's a 70% chance that we could deliver on time if we get that help quickly. This is how long we'll need that help. That gives the executive an opportunity to understand the consequences at your scale. The final C is control. Are you demonstrating command of your subject, including its risks and trade-offs? How well are you representing the area that you're responsible for? Do you actually understand the risks and trade-offs that are being presented? Are you presenting all of them? Now, executives, I keep talking about the broader context and you're closer to the work and all that kind of stuff, but Before I was a CTO, I was a VP of engineering. Before I was a VP of engineering, I was a director of engineering. Before I was a director of engineering, I was an engineering manager. And before I was an engineering manager, I was a lead. So I may not know the details of your specific project, but I do know a lot of stuff. I've been in your shoes. And if I feel like you're not accurately representing the risks and the trade-offs, even if I don't have all the specifics about your project, that's going to affect how I look at what you're presenting. Now, that can be because you're choosing not to give me all the risks and trade-offs because you're trying to lead me to a conclusion. And if I can tell that, that's going to be a problem. And it could be that you're not giving me all the risks and trade-offs because you don't see them. And that could be, well, all right, you don't have the level of experience yet. Or that could be, how good are you at your job? That might be a question for me. Executives are scanning for risk, alignment, implications, right? You're telling me about something going on in your team. I'm taking that in, trying to think about, okay, what can I do to help? Should I communicate this more broadly? How is this impacting other teams? All that kind of stuff. That's what I'm looking for when you're talking to me. You tell me, hey, we've had this incident. I'm going to start asking you, like, okay, how many customers are being affected? What the revenue implications? Because in my head, I'm now starting to write the message I'm going to send to the executive team to make them aware. This is what's going on. This is how it's impacting the business. This is how we're going to resolve it. This is when I think it's going to be resolved. So you might be thinking about, okay, this database is down. We're trying to figure it out. And we're talking to these people and we're doing this. And you want me to know all the details. And I got to think about, okay, how many customers is that going to affect? Does that mean revenue is being impacted? How long is that going to happen? How much revenue is this going to impact? If you skip one of those 4 C's, clarity, context, consequence, or control, I'm going to probably stop you and I'm going to go hunting for it. If you give me the clarity and the context, but you don't tell me the consequence, I'm going to start asking you questions until I feel like I know the consequence. And if I don't get a sense from you that you have an understanding of it, you don't have control of your area, command of your subject, I'm going to start thinking about who else on your team, or if I need to talk to your manager to make sure I'm getting the right information. I see people make the mistake when presenting to the executive team. I see folks derail their own credibility by being defensive. I'm going to call something out, or I'm going to see something in the way you're presenting, and I'm going to challenge you on it. And I'm not challenging you on it to make you look bad. I'm challenging you on it because I have different information than you do. And then people double down, or they're trying to save their ego. And then I usually have to get through that to say, look, this is what I'm seeing. I see people over-explain a lot or under-explain. Assume we have the same vocabulary. Again, if you're a developer presenting to an executive or a frontline engineering manager presenting to a C-level person, you are so much closer to the work. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. That being closer to the work, that's why you're being contacted, because you know what's going on at the lowest level of detail. That doesn't mean I need the lowest level of detail. And over-explaining, especially if you're talking not just to me, I don't mind it as much, but if you're talking to me and my peers who are not technical, you're going to lose them immediately. They're going to start checking their email. Everyone stops paying attention. And I have been in meetings where a team is presenting and I want visibility for people in my organization. So we're not just going to have the product manager speak, we're going to have the engineering manager speak or the dev lead speak and talk a little bit about it, because I also want the rest of the exec team to understand some of the complexity sometimes at a high level. I try and coach people, but I still have had people come in and they get into the details. And I have literally watched my peers stop paying attention and start doing other things because it doesn't mean anything to them. So over-explaining, which I've just over-explained, is a problem. Under-explaining, just assuming we all understand what you're talking about. You are in that work day to day. You live it. The people you're talking to don't. In your head, everyone understands how these systems work, and they don't. And so you just shortcut stuff because it seems obvious to you, and it isn't. You lose people too, because instead of over-explaining, you're using words people don't know, and you're assuming they know it. and they'll go, well, clearly this isn't for me. And then again, you just lose them. Certainly, I see it more on Zoom, but I used to see it in person too, like in a conference room. The executives would be sitting there, somebody would be presenting, they'd be over-explaining or under-explaining. They would just start losing people, and they would just start doing other work because they have lots of work to do. And it felt horrible because they're just being rude, but at the same time, maybe they just don't want to interrupt the person and say, like, hey, thank you, but we don't need that level of detail. If you get interrupted, it's not because we're trying to dominate the conversation or don't care what you have to say. It's because we're trying to understand something and you're not telling us what we need to hear. And sometimes we can be good about explaining that, and sometimes we're not. If we interrupt you, it's because we're trying to understand something very specific and you're just not talking about it. Or you referenced it and moved on, and we're like, oh, no, come back to that. That's actually why you're here. And so we may derail your just simple status meeting because it so happens that you just happen to be there and what your team is touching on actually has some relevance to this bigger company thing that we're looking at. So we may interrupt your status meeting to go deep into something that you were not prepared to speak about. That happens. If you're presenting a deck, bring backup slides because you may say the cost is growing. It's going to be maybe about 10% higher this next calendar year. And for us, we're having a whole discussion about budget, and you saying this one system being 10% higher is going to trigger a whole conversation about budget. And we're going to start asking you more and more details about cost in your team. If you weren't prepared for that, you weren't expecting it, you don't have that data, you're in a position where you have to start saying, I don't have the information, I'll have to get back to you on it. So bring as much detail as you have in case the conversation goes in any direction, because you won't know which direction the conversation will go in. If your boss is good and they have the context from their boss or their boss's boss or whatever, they may give you a heads up before the meeting, but you can't be sure. Again, it may be a conversation that was had 5 minutes before you entered the room. In technology, we have lots of jargon. Be prepared that people in the room may not understand that jargon and you may need to explain it. And so it's usually best to either have that definition ready or instead of using that jargon to use more plain language. And then ask yourself, whoever you're presenting to, what decisions may they need to make with the information you're giving? Because that'll also help you anticipate, but that also makes it clear what you're asking for from them. If you present information to executives that is not just like an update, oftentimes they're like, okay, well, that's great. What do you need from me? Like, why are you presenting this information to me? When you're sending an email, you're preparing a report for executives. Lead with the conclusion, not the journey. This happens a lot. I get communication from folks. They're like, hey, this is what happened, and blah, 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 blah. And I have to scan through to say, why are you telling me this? Like, what do you need from me here? Because you're writing me for a reason. I need to know why. Put that up top. This is the conclusion. We have this problem. Then you can put, this is how we understood that we have this problem. That's there if I am interested, but I may not be. I may not need that background necessarily. Use short declarative sentences. Be very clear. Again, avoid jargon unless it's necessary. And if you do use it, define it immediately. Be very careful about emotional or defensive framing. You want to look good in front of the executives. You get called out on something. It may not even be about you, but you're the one presenting. So you start to feel like it's personal. You start to get defensive. That immediately ends the conversation because you can't have a conversation. You're defending yourself instead of answering the question, which is not necessarily about you. If you're presenting to executives and you're interrupted, which you will be, promise you, treat it as a signal, not a threat. The people in this room talk to each other all the time. They have conversations you're not privy to. Something you said just triggered something for somebody in that room. They're going to interrupt you. They want to know more about something specific. They're going to go super deep. All of a sudden, you're talking about something very high level. They want to go deep. That's a signal that this is important to this person. It's not somebody trying to derail you from your presentation. You just said something that was important and somebody wants to talk about it. So explore that question fully before trying to move on. I have made that mistake presenting to executives. The executives started talking to each other because what I said, it just triggered the prior discussion for them. And at a certain point, I'm just standing there in the front of the room, in front of a projector, waiting. And I tried to bring it back to my presentation because I knew we were going to run out of time and that was going to be my only chance to present this stuff. And I tried to move it on. They didn't have it. And no, we ran out of time. You get the always, sorry, we ran out of time. Just send us the deck. That's the worst feeling. If the people you're talking to or somebody in the room goes super deep on something you consider minor, like the definition of the word avatar, that topic is no longer minor, which I did not understand. It may connect to context you don't see, or it may just be for that person. This is something that means a lot to them. And again, you just triggered something, but it's no longer a minor point, whether you think so or not. If you're asked a question you don't know the answer to, and I made this mistake as well. If you don't know, say you don't know. Say, I'm sorry, I don't have the information. I will get that information. I'll have that for you by end of day. It's more important for you to protect your credibility over your ego. It may feel bad that you don't have the answer to this question that they're asking, but it's better for you to be honest and say, I don't know, but I'll get you that information than it is to make something up or guess. Because if they say, what is this number or how is this going? And you don't really know, but you say, I think it's going pretty well because you want to look good. And they go, okay, great. And then they move forward and they're talking to somebody and they said, I heard this project's going pretty well. And that person has the information. They go, what? No, this project's in real trouble. Who told you it's going well? Oh, well, Kevin told me. Well, I don't know what he's talking about because that's definitely not the case. I either then look like I'm covering up or I look like I don't know, but I said anyway, which then means next question you ask me, am I telling you the truth or am I just guessing? So definitely protect your credibility over your ego. Plan to use about half your time. You are given an hour. Hey, we'd really like to understand what's going on with this project. Well, we're going to give you an hour. Plan to use about half your time because you're going to get interrupted. If not, you're done early. People are going to appreciate that. And if you're done in half an hour and you could have taken an hour, that's great because that meant you were very clear and very direct. Expect the conversation. Expect that people are going to want to interrupt. People are going to ask questions. People are going to go deeper. They're going to start talking to each other about your project or even about other things. And you're going to have to let that play out. That's okay. If you speak for 90% of the meeting, you probably missed something. There's something going on in the room you didn't understand, or you weren't really paying attention to your audience, or you weren't presenting it at the right level. So people were just tuning out and doing other things. I've been in lots of executive meetings where somebody comes in, they're presenting at the wrong level, or they're presenting in too narrow a way for the most of the audience, and people just get up and leave. Hey, you know what? I got another thing. I'm going to go. And it's just because they're saying, like, I don't want to be sitting here rude and just not paying attention to you. This is clearly not intended for me, so I'm going to leave the room. And that feels bad, but that's that person telling you, like, what you're presenting is not for me. Mistaking executive brevity for disinterest. Executives can be very direct, especially when I've worked at much larger companies with executives who are in 8 hours of meetings a day. And all the pleasant kind of vagueness gets pretty tiring after a while. If you're going from meeting to meeting to meeting, you really start to prioritize clarity and brevity and directness. And you become very direct because you're talking to lots and lots and lots of different people, and you may not talk to them again for a while. So you tend to get very direct. Direct executives being brief, being very direct, doesn't mean they're not interested. And you shouldn't take it that way necessarily. We all complain about how many meetings we have in a day. As an executive, especially in in-person companies, 8 hours of meeting in a day is not a joke. When I was at Adobe trying to get on the VP's calendar to talk to him about something, I would occasionally have to walk him to his car if I needed to talk to him, because that was the only way I could get time on his calendar because his calendar was full. That's what it's like to be an executive, especially at a larger company. Everybody needs your time. So understanding, that's another reason why executives, if they don't feel like this meeting is necessary for me, they'll just get up and leave sometimes or just start doing other things. It's because they get no time to do other things. And so if they see an opportunity like, this is really not for me, I'm invited, but I don't need to be here, they'll get up and leave because that gives them an opportunity to go catch up on email or to go talk to a person they need to talk to or whatever. It's important you understand that before you're offended by it. Executives are calendar packed. They're carrying information and context from other parts of the business. They're thinking about risk exposure. It's important that you understand that these are people too. They're not more important people. They're people, but they have a different job than you. And that job means they're responsible for a lot more stuff than just your stuff. They're interested in you, especially if they're your boss. They're supportive of you, but they got a lot of other stuff they're also thinking about. It's good to just keep that in your head when you're talking to them. If you're eager and you want to show your expertise, you want to show off, you want recognition from whoever you're presenting to or whoever you're talking to, and you feel challenged when they interrupt, because that means that they're not listening to you or you're trying to tell them something and they want to talk about something else. You want to explain your work, but they want to understand the impact and risk. The piece that is exciting for you or important for you is not necessarily the part of what you do that is important to them because of the things that they're thinking about. Just go with it. And again, if you don't know the answer to a question, or if you haven't thought about it, you just say it. That's a great question. I haven't really considered that. Let me think about it for a little bit and get back to you. They'll appreciate that. They will. Communication at this level is less about slides and reports. It's more about trust calibration. If you get the privilege of presenting to executives or being called by an executive to get your opinion on something, they're trusting you. That's a measure of trust. And if you do it well, including saying, I don't know when you don't know and not pretending to know things you don't, that means that you are a person they can come back to for information. You are somebody that they can talk to if they need to understand something, especially if you can present it well and explain it well. Another aspect of that, me as the CTO in the executive team, I am presenting to executives all the time. But my job is to translate all the technical stuff for non-technical people because they don't understand the details, and nor should they. I don't understand all the details of how marketing works. I understand the broad strokes. They understand the broad strokes of technology, but they're not going to understand if I want to get into the nitty-gritty. It's not right for them. That's not what they're interested in. So I am continually hearing from people on my team fairly complicated technical things, figuring out how to translate it for my peers. And I am talking about impact to the business, impact to customers, impact to their functions, those kinds of things, because I know from experience that's the kind of things that's most important to them. And the technical details, the fact that it might be really complicated or really cool, I can say, this was really cool. Like what they did was really cool. It was really hard and they figured it out. But that might be about the level I get it, unless somebody knows something about it and asks me more specific questions. That skill that I've developed over time by getting better at presenting to executives, and then as I moved into more senior leadership roles and I worked more cross-functionally, learning how to communicate more effectively with my peers, that is a critical skill if you are looking to move into executive leadership. Being able to translate your domain for other people is critical. Earlier, I thought being correct was enough. I learned that as I presented more to executives and had more interaction with executives, I learned that clarity and alignment matter more than technical precision. Now, as an executive, I recognize when somebody's protecting their ego instead of informing me. I value presenters who slow down and clarify. I've come to see executive communication as a leadership skill, not a presentation skill. It's about stewarding attention and trust. So when speaking to executives, you are not there to display expertise. You are assumed to have expertise. That's why you're there. You're not there to show it off. They assume you know what you're doing. You are there to enable good decisions. for the people or the person you're talking to. Every word should reduce ambiguity, increase alignment, or surface risk. If you remember one thing, when an executive pauses on a word that you use, or a phrase, or a technology, or something you're presenting on, that's not a derailment. That's the meeting. That's what the meeting is about. Ask yourself, when I present upward, am I optimizing for being right, or am I optimizing for being understood? Thanks, everyone. I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you some insight. If you have questions about this stuff, you can reach out to me. You can email me, contact@itdependsbook.net. You can also reach out to me on socials. I'm mostly on Blue Sky these days. I'm at kevingoldsmith.com. That's my personal site. So that's how you can reach me, or you can look me up by my name. You can also find me on Threads, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I'm on those as well. I always want to hear your questions. If there's something you agree with, something you disagree with, something I said that sparked a question for you, or is speaking to a challenge, but I didn't speak directly to it, you want to know more. Later this year, I'll probably do another set of Q&A episodes where I answer a bunch of your questions. Or if I'm speaking about a topic that you asked me about, I will probably reference it there. So I always want to hear from you, and really appreciate folks have been commenting on the episodes in various places, and I love to see that. Really appreciate it. And I will see you next week in the newsletter. I will be that week in Montreal speaking at Confu. If you're there, reach out. Very happy to meet up. And I will see you back here in 2 weeks on the podcast. Thanks a lot. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.